city building, tactical battles, and map management. Manor Lords is a game that has taken the tactical strategy genre by storm even before players have gotten their hands on it. But is finally here after what has been years of waiting and accumulated anticipation. Just days before release, Manor Lords reached the milestone of 3 million wishlists on Steam.
Wow!
Practically unheard of, especially for a studio releasing its first game. Now, wishlists do not inherently translate to sales, but they can be a good predictor. And when you factor in that Manor Lords will also be releasing on Microsoft's PC Game Pass on day 1, chances are that this is likely to be one of the most played games this year, period. Certainly in the strategy and city builder genre. I begin with this because despite Manor Lords being the first of its kind from a previously unknown developer and a relatively fresh publisher at that, it does not release and is not anticipated in a vacuum. Manor Lords has partially captured the imaginations of so many strategy gamers out there due to a perceived lack of catered to tastes elsewhere, and what amounts to, in my eyes, a lack of AAA innovation in this space. The reason I personally am so excited for it is because I see it as, for all intents and purposes, wanting and striving for the same things as me. For a purely and truly historically minded, authentic, intricate, detailed, immersive, and not least of all fun experience. One that doesn't take unnecessary shortcuts or streamlines vital aspects of tactical or strategic aspects. And all of it in a strategy concept I love. Namely the combination of peaceful town building with historical warfare. And as you'll come to see, despite releasing in early access, it is one of the most rich early access games I've played, but it's certainly not without its shortcomings. And with that, since only 10% of people watching this video are subscribed, it would mean so much to me if you decide to sub to the channel if you enjoy my style and what I make, and I thank you so much for doing so. But first, today's sponsor is the history and action-filled World of Tanks. World of Tanks is an amazing multiplayer wargame focused on PC, which is completely free to play and accessible to newcomers as well as intent for experienced players. And right now, use my link in the description to get 7 days of free premium access by signing up with the code COMBAT, giving you 250,000 credits and mighty premium tanks. Returning players receive 3 days of premium access with more tank goodness, so make sure to sign up now. Over 100 million players have duked it out in World of Tanks, so there is a large community here for you to join up with. World of Tanks offers a massive arsenal of tank destroyers, artillery, light, medium, and heavy tanks, and whether you're rushing in, taking it a bit slower, or using laid out tactics, with over 800 tanks, every situation is tailored to your needs. With over 40 battle maps with different terrain and geography to wage all-out tank warfare on, World of Tanks offers so much fun whether you're playing solo on a team or with friends, especially because of the deep historical accuracy and inspiration that's gone into crafting these models, and of course, you get to customize and upgrade them further to create your ultimate weapon of war. So sign up now using the link in the description, using the code COMBAT, and get 7 days of premium access with 250,000 credits and some awesome premium tanks. Thank you so much to World of Tanks for sponsoring this video. Now let's get right down to it. Manor Lords is a city builder first and foremost, taking place in what can only be described as a fictional Central European medieval setting. The goal is to take your ragtag group of villagers and feed them, shelter them, and attract more people to your town, expanding and ultimately maintaining what you have by accumulating more resources. At the same time, Manor Lords adds a layer of tactical strategy to the mix, allowing you to defend your towns from incoming raids, take down bandits who will steal your resources bit by bit, and finally vying for supremacy against an AI lord, who represents the ultimate warfare challenge in the game. It's this concept that's intrigued me for all these years, particularly because I am a Total War fan of almost 2 decades, and have longed for a historical strategy game to come along and offer something fresh. And if nothing else, Manor Lords feels fresh, but it's certainly a lot more than that. First of all, we need to lay down the facts on what Manor Lords actually is, as I've been getting a lot of questions from a lot of people. In its current state, Manor Lords is not a strategy game in the traditional 4X sense. There are no selectable factions, there is no traditional overworld campaign map, and warfare is not the main focus or drive. Instead, you get to select your avatar and banner to personalize your experience. Instead of a campaign map, we have the campaign map, which shows us the various regions on the map, but it's not really interactive. And warfare is here to support the city building, not the other way around, and that's what makes this interesting. And as such, Manor Lords is in its current state much more about the local and the personal than the grand and the overarching. But in Manor Lords, local doesn't mean boring, it means detailed and customizable. Every game in Manor Lords begins with you choosing your avatar or your persona, if you will, ranging from the rugged soldier, to the scoundrel but handsome devil, to the dignified yet intriguingly mischievous looking lady, all very well painted by the way. Even more portraits would be welcome though, as I couldn't find my particular brand of handsome but dignified blonde guy with heavy armor. I guess video games truly are dead. Jokes aside, this system could perhaps come to benefit from having a customization system, having you choose from a selection of faces, but then add on various clothing styles and headwear, which I think would be a nice little touch if you really like heavy armor, but don't necessarily want to be looking like you just fell out of the local tavern at 65. What I'm immediately awestruck by though is the coat of arms customization, which is the real faction selector of Manor Lords, let's be real. In essence, this is Manor Lords allowing you to create your own insignia, a symbol which is going to be stitched into your every banner on the field of battle, and importantly, will be positioned in the top right corner of your screen. So I suggest making something you love looking at. That's what I did anyway, and I was able to do so because the system is so intricate. From choosing from a selection of symbols in various shapes and sizes, to color schemes, the partitioning of your shield, and vitally, the sizing and number of symbols which made me gasp, and we have here one of the deepest and coolest coat of arms systems I've ever seen, and rivals and improves upon those we find in games like Crusader Kings 3 and Mountain Blade 2 Bannerlord. You can even import your own custom emblem from outside the game here, and that's a great touch. Manor Lords offers 3 states of gameplay. The first, Rise to Prosperity, is a purely peaceful mode where you focus on building your towns and growing your population, completely without combat and warfare. In other words, if you just want to chill or focus on your towns, this is the mode for you. However, to me, doing so would be akin to playing The Witcher 3 with the music turned off. In other words, grounds for high treason, and that's why I've mostly been focusing on the Restoring the Peace mode, which to me is the quintessential Manor Lords mode, combining well-paced city building with the warfare I've been longing for. However, the main aspect of Restoring the Peace is that it features the game's first enemy faction, namely an off-map AI lord, who nonetheless owns regions on the map and must be dealt with to win. The last mode, On the Edge, is even more fast-paced, forcing you to deal with even more bandits and raiders than in Restoring the Peace, but with no enemy AI lord present. However, all of these parameters associated with each game mode may be tweaked at will, allowing you for example to combine the enemy AI lord with frequent bandit raids and more disagreeable villages with higher needs. This is a great way to customize your experience further, and I really appreciate that. For myself though, and for people who enjoy an exciting experience with combat, I personally play with more or less the maximum amount of bandits, raids, and the enemy AI lord present on the map. I appreciate though that we can even tweak the AI lord's agency, meaning that he can just be a passive entity, he can claim neutral regions on the map, or he can even claim your held regions, the latter which may pose a significant challenge at any stage in the game. For the purposes of this review, I'll be focusing on the mode of Restoring the Peace, since I find this to be the quintessential Manor Lords experience. Manor Lords begins as most city builders do, namely with very little, although you can in fact tweak how many starting resources you do begin with. But the gist is that you begin by getting a feel for your surroundings, find out where the animals, berries, and other harvestable resources are. What I like to do though is figure out where I'd like to place my more majestic buildings like church and manor down the road for the most pleasing city layout after a few hours of gameplay. But what's absolutely crucial is figuring out the fertility of the soil in your region, because that will by and large determine if you're able to focus on farming to feed your people. You see, Manor Lords is divided into 7 different regions, each one featuring their own levels of fertility for various types of crops. Some of the innate resources like iron and stone even feature rich deposits, meaning you can count on receiving a lot more of it than from regular sources elsewhere. I think these variations on the map are great not only for strategic play, but for asymmetric ones, since this means that most playthroughs will be different, and you'll have to plan ahead to actually expand into new regions to acquire what you don't have a lot of. That being said, seeing as there currently is no enemy faction on the map in the traditional sense, i.e. no towns, meaning that there are no AI towns that can make use of these resources and go to war with you over them, Manor Lords currently lacks that true asymmetry which would take advantage of a system where one or more actual factions make use of these resources over another and utilize them to gain the upper hand. This touches on an important subject which obviously has a lot to say for Manor Lords at this stage, namely its early access status, which will permeate this review. You see, at the moment, it's rather unclear, and understandably so, that we don't know exactly what Manor Lords will look like in a month, in 6 months, or a year or two from now on. I don't know if there will for sure be enemy factions or allied ones dotting the map with their own towns and villagers, and if we may actually forge alliances or go to war against some or together with others. Developer Slavic Magic has stated that certain additions are likely or will be considered, such as AI towns. But again, what we can say for certain is that they are not here at the moment, and that's what you'll have to consider at this stage. Now to some, this may seem strange, particularly since YouTubers like me have been covering Manor Lords at some point or another since all the way back in 2021. But more importantly, since there are barely any strategy games out there without potentially powerful rivals and allies. But this of course harkens back to the fact that first and foremost, Manor Lords isn't a typical strategy game, at least not at this point. It's mainly about that town building life, about population management, food and fuel management, and importantly to me, how you can use your artistic city designer vision to create the most stunning yet realistic medieval towns you can imagine. And in that field, Manor Lords has got me absolutely addicted. This review is based on more than 50 hours of Manor Lords gameplay hours in less than 2 weeks, and it has to be stated that for an early access game, this is actually quite insane. It also has to be said that the only reason I stopped playing for now was so I could finish this review in time. I'm serious, the game has me hooked, and that's even without the added layer of strategy elements that I would usually consider quite important to a game like this. But it goes to show how great the fundamentals of Manor Lords really are, and how strong those bones are even on launch. You see, as we began with before I went on a massive tangent, there are a few crucial things you need to look out for. Other than resources and fertility, you need to be aware of the dangers of leaving your supplies out in the open. One of the most important things you can do in the early game is to set up storage facilities where your building and food supplies go, because one of the biggest threats to your very early survival is the weather. You see, Manor Lords features a system of months and seasons with various modifiers, and you may choose which season to begin your game in. I tend to choose spring, since I love the green and because it gives me a good deal of time to prepare for my first winter. But spring also comes with the added threat of rain, and heavy rain will destroy resources that are just laying out in the open, which can set you back a few days. However, I don't know whether the weather in Manor Lords is scripted or not, because every year it seems to me like things like rain and snow happen quite often at the same time and intervals. At any rate, this means that most playthroughs I've had in Manor Lords' very early game, I'm talking the first month or two, go about the same. As frankly is tradition in city builders, because your early needs are often the crucial ones. You build your logging camp, your hunting camp, your storage facilities, and importantly, you set up your first homes. This last part is especially important, since the main factor in raising a successful town in Manor Lords is to keep your approval high, roughly meaning how happy your citizens are, but more importantly, keeping their needs met. Your people begin as homeless, you see, and if you do not give them shelter, they'll never truly approve of your rule. Gathering enough timber to create new homes is therefore of massive import, not only because it finally cements where your town center might be located, but also because it gives your people shelter, room to grow, and lastly, lets you know what they need to grow further. You see, every level of housing, of which there are 3, comes with their own needs for the house to be expanded to the next level, with the needs becoming harder to fulfill with every step. However, most of the needs follow the same trajectory, only needing more diversity in the different requirements, meaning that while a level 1 house needs just 1 article of clothing or a basic wooden church to upgrade to a level 2, a level 2 house requires even more diversity in food, clothing, and a stone church to make it to level 3, including a bunch of new resources and even gold to reach that higher level. However, whether or not your households manage to acquire these goods is one thing, because even though you're technically producing various food types at once, your people need to be able to pick them up from a marketplace. Every individual in Manor Lords has a different task after all, whether that is being actively assigned to a job or passively waiting to help with construction or transportation of goods. And bringing home the good stuff is something they will do when they're not working. In order to satisfy their needs, increase your approval, and reach those higher tier buildings then, you should have a marketplace in relatively close vicinity where your people are not forced to go completely out of their way to fetch stuff. I think it works really great actually, both because being able to upgrade housing is a fun minigame in itself, and because your citizens feel like they're living their own lives, since they actually transport wares like firewood, fuel, or clothes back into their own homes. They even go to church to pray, which is also important to consider when placing down your church. However, even though I like the fact that Manor Lords does not force you to keep your church super close to people for you to check the church need, I wish the game offered a proximity visual, meaning that we saw the various radiuses in which a church or a marketplace appeared nearer or further away from the relevant homes. This could help you see whether you might need to build more marketplaces when you have more homes, or whether going to church will take up too much of your people's time by virtue of being too far away, even though it doesn't actively hurt their approval for it to be so. Indeed, this becomes an indirect problem when your regional market is technically doing well, but your homes aren't feeling the good times. For example, I found myself having a good surplus of food and fuel, but some homes will continue to lack them, and I find that it's simply because the marketplace is too far away from the household, meaning that no person in the family has time to continuously fill their need. The fix for this in the short term is simply to build a closer marketplace, and perhaps set up a few more production buildings so that the relevant people will set up more stalls on those newer marketplaces. But it still needs to be more transparent whether a home is too far away from a market for that home's needs to actually be met in a practical sense. Further, and this is a little pet peeve, I do wish we could build in steeper terrain, because right now the steep terrain feature seems a bit unfinished since it will sometimes matter and other times not. And when it doesn't, it can prevent quite a lot of space being utilized or hinder those more scenic placements of houses. In true simulation style, Manor Lords is a game built on progression. A higher tier resource demands another or several other lower tier resources to make, which means that the availability of the cool stuff will increase or indeed unlock over time. Making bread might seem like an easy thing to do, but when you consider that you need at least one farm, you need a farmhouse, you need farmers to not just plow the fields, but sow them, wait half a year for the yield to grow, and then harvest it, then turn the harvest into grain, only to deliver the grain to a windmill to turn it into flour, then turn the flour into bread at a bakery, and then deliver those breads to the market where your people can finally acquire it, you can tell that farming won't provide food in the short term, and can even be hazardous since they'll only provide food once a year, and you better pray the fertility and yield is good. However, notice how this means that complexity comes with time and is not necessarily thrown at you right away unless you invite it. What I found to be Manor Lords' perhaps greatest strength, and the reason why I keep returning to it and loving every second, is not just because it looks visually stunning, but because of its pacing. You see, Manor Lords manages to not fall into the city builder trap of a town doing well, then suddenly growing too fast and spinning out of control. Manor Lords is challenging in its own way, particularly when it comes to unlocking and maintaining certain higher tier goods, but it's not unfairly punishing in the early to mid game. It doesn't suddenly surprise you and knock you senseless with a sudden boom in population or needs. And I think this is due to more than just luck, it's specifically due to the way the game is designed. You see, while arguably the main goal in Manor Lords is to keep a high approval rating so that you can grow your population and thereby expand your town, your population doesn't automatically grow. The approval rating simply makes it more likely or unlocks the potential for more people. And crucially, new families will only arrive to town if there is room for them. If you find you're stuck with a certain number of families, for example, and you're in need of more workers, you need to actively raise more housing to expand your population. And only then will your city grow and new challenges related to it arise, like a lack of food or fuel. This means that to some extent, you can pretty much tailor Manor Lords' moment-to-moment difficulty to your taste, whether that means that you wish to stock up on food before inviting new members to come, or if you value faster growth and the ability to employ more people on new projects, but with a bit more uncertainty. Of course, like any city builder, Manor Lords does embody that capitalist mindset of ever more growth, so at some point you're going to want to expand your town either way. So basically I'm saying you'll do wise to prepare. This makes it so that Manor Lords' difficulty curve feels natural and combats the common one, the one where the game is difficult at the start but becomes easier with time. Because here, depending on the availability of resources, I find that Manor Lords begins relatively easy, but gets gradually more difficult with time. And that is not just an extremely nice change of pace, but also means that it manages to stay interesting. A huge part of Manor Lords' population management is where you assign your workers, because even though the game has a population counter, Manor Lords' people are actually divided into families, and it's the families you assign to various posts, meaning all the members of that family join in on that particular job. In other words, you're going to have way fewer families than people, and will have to be very picky, at least in the early to mid game, about where your families are assigned. This is another point regarding that expansion pacing, since you have to consider whether you have enough workers to even assign them to a new project or not. In addition, remember how we talked about housing and upgrades? Well, every new house upgrade up to level 3 nets that house one more slot for a new family. But importantly, every house has their own innate add-on as well. At least they can have it if you allocate space for it. To feed your people, you can choose to purchase a vegetable garden or a chicken coop for your backyard, for example, thereby providing you with a passive food yield over time. But once you reach level 2, a house can be turned into an artisan building, effectively turning a family into specialized workers and removing them from the available pool of families that can be assigned to other things. Artisans are powerful, however, allowing you to finally start crafting new weapons, armor, and more intricate clothing and ale if you have the resources and raw material required. In this way, artisans and having a surplus population so that you can afford creating a specialized industry like this are crucially important to any bustling town, but also require that you do some planning. Not just in terms of population, but in what your short to long-term goals are in what you wish to focus on producing. However, most other buildings in the game, from logging camps to windmills and trading posts, cannot be upgraded to feature more workers or cooler designs or more storage or faster production or more accumulation of goods, although some can. You could argue that quote-unquote upgrading a trading post with a horse is an upgrade, but sadly there is an issue here where Manor Lords doesn't tell you how much faster your goods will leave or arrive from a trading post with a horse than without. You just assume a horse is better, but since you cannot assign a horse to a specific good or trader, and cannot see the days count down until a specific good arrives, it currently feels like something you just toss money at and hope improves something somewhere. This is something I technically can forgive since we're dealing with early access and a pre-release version at that, but it is on a fundamental level important that players know what an upgrade actually does, and how it impacts a very significant part of your production chain, especially when you spend gold to get it. Indeed, the time it takes to produce something in general is hidden from the player. Families will simply be transporting a good, or they'll be waiting or something, but you never see a progress bar or a day counter which let you know when you can expect the finished article. What's interesting is that in general, this doesn't actually necessarily bother me. In fact, it appears a bit more immersive that I don't know exactly when a spear is done being made, because it makes it feel like my workers aren't robots on a conveyor belt. But in terms of trade in particular, I find that it's a lot more important to keep better track of what's coming in and out of your region, since it not only usually takes a lot more time, but items you import are often the items you desperately need or are not producing enough of yourself, meaning that timing can be an issue. That being said, Manor Lords UI is something that has completely enchanted me, and is just pure bliss to use. First of all, it might sound weird to the younger crowd, but the older and wiser you get, the more you realize that a good user interface is not just the cherry on top, but the fundamental flavor of the game in this genre. Without a good UI, you do not have the information you need. You do not have an easy time extracting that information. Things can feel sluggish or clunky, and a bad UI can for all intents and purposes ruin the experience. Luckily, in Manor Lords, the UI is one of my great joys. Whether you're laying down roads, looking for different types of sub-resources from a category, making space for houses and their expansions, and indeed resizing them and seeing the extensions show up in real time, the UI feels snappy, intelligent, and it's just fun to use, especially with the effects and sounds and subtle screen shake that show up when you decide to lay things down. They almost give the construction process of Manor Lords a tactile analog feel, and that is just impressive. If that wasn't enough, what I absolutely adore is yet another aspect of that good immersion, since the building icons are beautifully hand-drawn to imitate what the buildings actually look like, and not some 2D abstract icon like so many strategy games have come to use. On the upper side of the screen, we're given all the information we need about our city, from the amount of workers we have, to their approval, and how many months of food and fuel they have left. On the bottom is where we have the action section, from putting down roads, to buildings, raising our levy, finding the help screen, and changing settings. It's funnily enough this last section that truly shook me, since being able to look at controls or change visual settings from this tiny interactive menu is seriously revolutionary, and I love it. On the other hand, what could use a lot more work is the help section. I use it mostly for understanding where certain resources come from, but finding out what they're used for is much harder. For example, most resources will tell you which building is required to make them, or which resources you need first, but they won't tell you what resources they lead to, or where they can be utilized. This is a major problem, since it forces you to jump around to specific production buildings to see which resources they need, and then to jump around the menu to see which buildings actually produce them. In other words, I'd like a help section, preferably sectioned into alphabetic order, since now it seems mostly random, where a product is shown both its place of origin and what it might be used for, plus a brief description of what it actually is. The overview map, let's call it the campaign map, is also mostly well made. you can see the outline of towns drawn in, which is cool, the location of the various resources, and even where various armies are located and how they move in real time. However, I'd personally like it more if we could also move armies from this screen, i.e. select our units and place them on a different point on the map, since, let's face it, Manor Lords regions are vast, and it can be tedious to constantly move the camera around from one edge to the next if the bandit group spawns on the other side of the map. Plus, I think it would add visual depth to the map if our cities weren't just outlined, but if our coat of arms featured over them, perhaps over the local manor if one existed. It would further be awesome if our armies weren't just the same icons as on the lower zoom levels, but if they actually looked like armies with banners and stuff, to make it fit with the artistic vision of this map. Either way, that last part is mostly wish-making, but still, I think it would work really well. All this time and we haven't really talked about how gorgeous Manor Lords is. I could and have used so many words to describe it, be them beautiful, gorgeous, immersive, authentic, when talking about how the trees sway in the wind, how summers look warm and rich, and autumn is gorgeously red and colorful, the pouring torrential rain covering the land, or how both the days and the months and seasons blend effortlessly into one another. It means so much to me because these days, or let's be real, since the dawn of time, most city builders have pursued a cartoony or stylized look, going in a direction I personally am not a fan of. But Manor Lords does the opposite. It features a world that looks more realistic than virtually any other, truly rivaling the most beautiful first or third person adventure and role-playing games out there, but for a game where you're constantly shifting between the local and the regional, between literally walking around on your map to gazing at it from a bird's eye view. And I love these zoom levels, by the way, whether right there on the ground or high up in the sky. Sure, I wish we could adjust the LOD, the point at which models pop in and out of various detail levels, allowing me to utilize my futuristic alien-level hardware to keep maximum detail at all times. But other than that, I don't want to just say that there isn't much to complain about, but rather that I'm actively taken aback every moment I spend here. Seeing the sun come up over the horizon, or indeed go down behind the mountains, spending time looking over my growing fields, or seeing that windmill do its thing, indeed just looking at my bustling cities from various angles, from the perspective of a life lover like myself, this is what video games are all about. I feel happy playing Manor Lords. I feel like I want to spend time here, not just because I want to see my numbers go up, but because it's fun doing so. Because touching virtual grass is nice actually. Because the ambient sounds of birds and bustling markets is endearing. And because the music complements it all. A good and melodic soundtrack I can hum to is massively important to me, particularly when I play strategy or forever games. And Manor Lords, for the most part, offers this kind of music. The one that immerses you and makes you hum after just a few listens. If anything, I want more of the chants. I want more of the Gregorian church music because it's so rare in gaming, yet it creates the perfect backdrop for this already beautiful canvas. The main menu music itself is something I wish was in-game, since it's positively some of the best medieval chant music I've heard in recent memory, certainly since Medieval 2's Amen, which is about the highest, most naked praise for Manor Lords I can give. It gives me serious Kingdom of Heaven vibes, and all I can say is, more. Give me more of that sweet music. I beg you, Pressure Cooker Studios and composers Elben Schutte and Daniel Matte with help from Simon Radcliffe, because this is magic. I just need more of it. Now, for the vast majority of the fundamentals and the game design then, Manor Lords city building knocks it out of the park. But, and this is important to know, I've encountered numerous bugs or weird situations happening, like with completely unbalanced and nonsensical trading, where imports are always more expensive than exports no matter which goods are traded, farming appearing much weaker than it should be considering the time and worker investment it demands, the actual in-game days not completely lining up with the months, since according to the countdown thing to things like bandit raids or mercenary upkeep, there are about 60 days in a month, which seems strange. The game not indicating why I'm not getting more families moving in, despite having high approval and available housing, and so on. The trade imbalance is particularly egregious, however, and it needs to be addressed immediately. The funny thing about that though, is that Manor Lords also features a perk system, or development system if you will, where you receive points with certain accomplishments. The Better Deals perk can be used to decrease the price of imports, which suddenly makes trading extremely lucrative. And so if you already have a working industry geared towards exports, you can almost completely ignore farming and make money while importing heaps of food. Now I like the perk system in itself. It's great that it allows you to increase the productivity of various sectors, or unlock new and heavier armor for example. But I do find it a bit weird that technology like this is based on region and not global. Although I do have my suspicions that it's designed like this to avoid regions functioning in the exact same way, allowing you to specialize certain regions and ways of playing over others. To me though, this should more be a matter of geography and fertility more than anything else. And since you can thus far only spend a maximum of 6 points in any region, with many more perks available than that, it becomes strange when your capital, bustling as it is, can forge heavy armor and grow apple trees, but has no idea how to plow fields with oxen or make its own honey. I think a cool mechanic could be if the current system is kept, but if technology and innovations like these could slowly integrate between regions, allowing you to passively earn them over time as the regions interact with each other. By the same logic, it would be awesome if families could migrate between regions, say if their needs are lacking in one, but is at a surplus in another. Back to my point though, expect bugs and certain unbalance is what I'm saying, and even though it can create some frustrating or inconvenient moments, the dev is aware, and I'm sure we'll see them worked on in due time. Perhaps some will even be patched up in time for this review. But in essence, even though most mechanics work and I'm absolutely loving my time, the polish is definitely lacking. Due to the early access nature of this game, you can also expect to be waiting for more epic versions of stuff. In the concept art for the game, for example, you can clearly see a large town surrounded by mighty stone walls, a large castle, and what looks like a great abbey or cathedral in the midst of it. Currently, none of this is possible. Indeed, the most pimped up manor is essentially what you see here. A humble house with a palisade wall and a wooden tower next to it. The largest church remains a small stone church, certainly cooler than the wooden one, but it's not exactly awe-inspiring. And this is the only version too. It would actually be cool if we could have several versions of the same tier church. The coolest buildings, on the other hand, are absolutely those tier 3 houses, which give me serious high Middle Ages vibes. Despite this, it's again important to consider that this is just the beginning, I think. Except for the bugs, which definitely need to be ironed out soon, I am overall extremely happy with what Manor Lords has to offer. But that doesn't make it any less tantalizing to imagine higher tier production buildings, castles, stone walls, or cathedrals littering this land of mine. Oh, and importantly, Greg, my friend, please allow me to outfit my manor and various buildings with banners. I'd love to see my banners fly high in the sky while farming rye while my enemies cry. They could even have a function, improving law or something, since it would signal your presence and domination in the region. And speaking of banners, the second part of Manor Lords is the warfare. Finally, we have arrived at what everyone's excited for. Just kidding, of course, just kidding. But not really. Because Manor Lords is for all intents and purposes one of the only games that seems to dare to offer what so many strategy game fans actually want. Battles that feel realistic, tactical, and most of all, look authentic, even though this is on a relatively smaller scale. There's no other way to put it. Manor Lords battles look visually stunning, utilizing Unreal Engine and some amazing unit modeling and banners to create arguably the most immersive battles of all time, not counting for scale and level of development. I'm just going to put that right out there. Because as much as I love what's going on here, and I want to begin with this not to create any unrealistic expectations, currently Manor Lords offers a very slim pickings in terms of units and what you can do with them. As of right now, you have infantry units with swords or axes and shields, spearmen, polearms, bowmen, and if you have a manor, a retinue that's more powerful and more heavily armored. It's not nothing, but you'll notice that there's no cavalry and no siege weapons, which if you just arrived here in the Manor Lords camp, you might expect from a game like this. The fact that the latter two are not present is, as I understand it, simply due to the fact that the game isn't finished yet or haven't balanced their design. But whatever the case, I certainly hope they make it into the game in the not too distant future, because managing cavalry in this game would be undeniably epic. But the truth is that frankly, as much as I want more units and more diversity in battle types, say sieges, I didn't immediately feel that need, because I was too busy being so impressed by how the battles already felt even now. The way bowmen fire off salvos, the way infantrymen bump into each other as they clash, the way the combat feels intense due to the dynamic movements and Medieval 2-like finishing moves and seemingly multiple units' ability to attack one enemy at a time, it feels so refreshing. Coming from Total War, for example, Manor Lords feels like that next step we never got. And even though in some ways, due to the lack of units or castle sieges, Manor Lords battles can in some ways feel like an extremely well-functioning tech demo, it's a tech demo I return to, a demo I love and feel like I want to immerse myself deeper into, because what's here is already so good. Units have various modifiers determining their morale and effectiveness, say whether they've exhausted themselves by running, if they're surrounded, under arrow barrage attacks and so on, and crucially, formations and positions allow the player to have a lot more say in how units approach a situation. Have your bowmen focus on range, or decrease their range but increase the attack power is one option, while you can have your shieldmen assume defensive positions to brace when the enemy charges into your lines. Make use of envelopments and even hide in forests, which even the AI manages to utilize quite well. What makes it all so much better is how your levy and the battles are directly tied to your city and the grander project. The fact that every single man on the field is drawn straight from your population at home. That means that when you're off campaigning, your workforce is temporarily and dramatically cut. But it also means that if you lose men in battle, they will be forever lost to you, potentially significantly damaging your economy and your ability to defend yourself, not to speak of the families they'll leave behind. Indeed, not only does this make for one of the most immersive population systems ever, but your industry can also be geared towards warfare, by having artisans craft various weapons and better, more durable armor, giving your men a better fighting chance against the enemy. This is particularly awesome, because instead of simply recruiting better types of units, your base levies are simply outfitted with better gear, and that is exactly how it should be. Of course, if you've managed to create a sustainable economy, you can always spare the valuable lives of your men, at least to some extent, and allow mercenaries to do the fighting for you. This can be mostly in monetary terms, but mercs are often well equipped and is mustered relatively quickly, which means that they can be a force to be reckoned with all on their own, or indeed as an extension of your levy and personal, well-equipped retinue, the sort of general's bodyguard of Manor Lords, if you will. This is such a vital aspect to me, and I love how interconnected these two sections of the game are, because whether you're sending your own men into battle or paying mercenaries to do the job, you're still reliant on running a good town to do so. This goes twofold for your retinue, because not only do you need a manor to begin recruiting them, but they're not armed like your regular levies. Retinues can be recruited by spending gold, and they can have their armor upgraded by spending more gold, either by purchasing from foreign lands, which costs more, or from the local arms industry, which costs much less, but which also depletes your stock. I also love that you can customize these units, with helmets, weapons, shields, color schemes, and even names of your choice, making the retinue quite obviously the coolest unit in the game. In the future, I hope we see even more customization and options here, like even higher tier units, and it seems there's going to be a progression system with experience and perks that's not currently in the game, but which would certainly be very welcomed. However, as it stands, Manor Lords battles aren't really where they should be. For one, there is no way to see where your formation is going and how they will be positioned once given the order, so it can be tough to reposition individual units relative to others. And then there's the difficulty. Throughout the game, bandit camps and raids will threaten the supplies and the safety of your towns, and as you can see here, an undefended village will indeed be at their mercy, a mercy which is pretty much non-existent. However, if you are even moderately prepared, these fights will be much too easy. I absolutely loved my first battle, featuring only a group of 18 allied spearmen meeting 16 enemy bandits. I left that field having routed the bandits and not losing one man, and I think it helped that my spearmen were placed in defensive mode to hold their ground. Not one died, which felt amazing, but I don't think this should be the case almost every time. You see, right now, you can fight similar battles and emerge with minimal casualties. In the largest battle I ever played up until that point, meeting virtually similar numbers in one of those game-defining battles, I emerged having lost exactly 16 men, which out of my 258-man army resulted in a 16% loss, funnily enough. As much as I love winning big, this seems a bit strange, particularly for that one unit of spearmen which was attacked by 2 enemy units and only lost 6 out of their 36 men. This can of course be explained by the fact that my men were heavily armored and such, but so were the enemy, and it is a trend that nevertheless tracks with the other battles I've fought. Because at some point, bandit camps become such easy targets that it becomes a mundane act to get rid of them. You can essentially have the cheapest tier of mercenary units on retainer, because getting rid of one bandit camp every month or so more than pays for their upkeep. In essence then, I think the enemy should be just a bit harder to deal with, whether this is done by increasing their numbers, making the AI better to create better formations, or slightly increasing their lethality. Indeed, it would be great if we could get more variety bandits as well, since now they are basically just club-wearing Neanderthals essentially. I'd love to see mercenary companies go rogue and actually be hard to deal with. I'd love for bandits not to just randomly steal your supplies magically, but to actually attack you without burning down your village, but instead take stuff with them, and in the process perhaps become harder to fight down the line. In terms of real enemies though, your nemesis in Manor Lords is the good old Lord Hildebold von Barenneute. And yes, there is a diplomacy mechanic, but it is extremely work in progress, and from my experience, doesn't really work all that well, except other than for declaring war against this Hildebold. Now what's good is that Hildebold's range of abilities can be tweaked before starting the game, so he can be completely non-existent, he can be passive, he can attack neutral regions, or he can be set to claim even your own. But remember the mercenaries from before? At this stage, it seems that both you and Hildebold rely on the same pool of them, and if he recruits them, you cannot. This is kind of cool in a way, but it doesn't fully work. The reason for this is that Manor Lords has a system where every month or so, the mercenary unit pool is technically refreshed. But in reality, it's only refreshed if no mercs are currently hired. This means that you cannot endlessly recruit mercs, which is sad, and if Hildebold has recruited them and keeps them handy, you'll never be able to do so. But what harms Hildebold is that either since the mechanics aren't fully finished, or just due to him not having a town really, his resources seem limited. He'll be very slow to claim even neutral regions for himself, for example, which it seems both him and the player can only do with the influence mechanic. Influence is gained by destroying bandit camps, building manors, and winning battles, giving a tithe to the church. But if Hildebold isn't winning battles or destroying camps, I personally don't know if he gains influence in some other way. In these ways, Manor Lords' diplomacy, war, and conquest mechanics need a lot more polish before they work as expected. This leads to a few situations where you don't always know what's going on, whether the AI has checked out or whatever, and in terms of bandits, it's come to the point where I just send my mercenary units to them and have them auto-battle, since it's only one group of them anyway, and I'm likely to not lose any men in the fight. Sacking a bandit camp nets you much needed gold, and the game gives you two choices, either to pocket the money or to send the sum to the nearest region. However, with more than one region, I very much dislike the randomness of this last choice. I'd much rather we could send the money to our preferred region, since the nearest one isn't always the one in need of it. With all that being said, the battles and warfare of Manor Lords are essential to the experience, as it creates actual stakes and actual epic moments you wish to experience over and over again. They are so well choreographed, the units appear realistic and are so beautifully modeled that it's astounding it all comes from the first iteration of the system. I love how the archers string their bows and fire away, and the sounds of the battlefield make it that much more visceral. And even though we do have uneven terrain here, I'd love to see even more variation. More hills, a few narrow choke points, more rivers, and perhaps even bridges and dilapidated fortifications lost to no man's land. My daydreaming could go on forever, frankly, which honestly I see as a sign of how great the fundamentals are here. But also that, yeah, Manor Lords definitely has a lot of room for growth and potential. As an early access game though, that's only natural. My wishlist for future Manor Lords content is long, but that's a testament to how much potential the game oozes. I want higher tier buildings of every kind, I want walls and castles and abbeys with banners flying atop their spires, I want sieges, I want larger armies, the levying of which could be balanced against a drop in approval, which makes them much harder to maintain if they get large enough. I'd love rival AI towns, I'd love a perk that allows for shield maidens, more difficult and rogue mercenary enemies, even more musical tracks, more diverse regions. I'd love a simple multiplayer mode with versus capabilities. I'd love individual family wealth. I'd love power structures and politics in our regions, and so on and so forth. For now though, I think balancing and bug fixing is the #1 priority. But all of this makes me feel like Manor Lords has an extremely bright future, one I hope the community embraces, and one I sincerely hope involves a Steam workshop. But for now, as a game that feels revolutionary in most aspects, Manor Lords is nothing but a treat, and is both the game historically minded city builders and strategy players both need and deserve. A dark knight that doesn't have to hide its face to symbolize the love and the passion for history in a world of cartoonish fantasy and dumbed down mechanics. And to me, that's all Manor Lords needs to be at this point, because despite its need of balancing and patching, as an early access game, Manor Lords has delivered everything it promised, and still managed to exceed my expectations. If there's one city builder you play this year, it needs to be Manor Lords, and I wholeheartedly recommend it. Let me know what you think of Manor Lords in the comments, and if you enjoyed the video, please remember to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. I also have a Patreon and YouTube membership club, so if you really enjoyed my work, I'd be extremely grateful if you joined up and supported me further. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.